Hey, welcome to the shop. This is a little story about an experience I had with a high school kid who, if not for my conscience, would have made a serious mistake. This one goes way back, and I can't find any photos of the motorcycle that is the main character of the story. In 1993, my then girlfriend and I moved into a house. Although I had been motorcycling for much of my life by then, we had lived in apartments for 6 years and I didn't have any place to store a bike. I was also in university, so owning a bike was a luxury we just couldn't afford. By the time we moved into the house, I was finished school and I heard the motorcycle sirens calling. The house had an empty drive-in basement, which looked to me like it needed a bike to take up some of the space. Although I was finished school, money was still tight, so a new bike wasn't in the cards. I scanned the classified ads for weeks to find something that I thought would be worth the small budget I had. And sometime in the fall of 1993, I bought a 1982 Yamaha Seca XJ650. I was familiar with the Secas, as years earlier a good friend of mine had owned a 750, and it was an excellent bike. The Secas were Yamaha's 1980s answer to the Honda inline fours, and like the Hondas, they were relatively fast, smooth, and reliable bikes. In hindsight, I can see that I was nostalgic for these bikes because I really liked my friend's 750, so I guess I was expecting the 650 to be cut from the same cloth. This old 650 wasn't in great shape, and I knew it needed work. I forget now most of what it needed, but the main thing was a cylinder base gasket, which didn't scare me. I had rebuilt the engines of several bigger bikes by then, so I replaced the cylinder head gaskets over the fall and winter, plus a bit of other work, and I thought it would be good to go in the spring. It wasn't, really. In fact, it seemed like every time I rode this old bike, something would break, malfunction, or otherwise go wrong. And over a full riding season, I might have put a couple 100 miles on it, and likely worked on it for as many hours. I had owned plenty of beat-up old bikes before then, and I was quite familiar with the ride, break, fix, and repeat cycle, but this one just tired me out. When I bought it, I wasn't looking for a long-term project. I just wanted to ride again. Things reached a point with this bike that I just lost interest in it. It wasn't worth investing a lot of money, so it spent most of its time parked. A year or so later, I decided to sell it, and I put an ad in the local classifieds. I was only asking a few $100 because I just wanted it gone. I got no serious interest in it for a few weeks. Then a guy called and asked to come see it. He showed up with a young lady who turned out to be his slightly older sister. She apparently was there as a second set of eyes, but it didn't take long for me to realize that neither of them knew much about motorcycles. When I sell a motorcycle or anything else, I'm 100% upfront about anything I know that's wrong with it. Aside from the simple morality of it, I'm just not interested in having to worry about an unhappy buyer coming back to demand a refund because they eventually learned the bad news that I didn't disclose earlier. So I told these kids everything wrong with the bike that I knew about, even though I could tell it was all Greek to them. After a short visit, they thanked me and went on their merry way. I didn't expect to hear from them again. But that evening, this young gentleman called and told me he wanted to buy the bike. At first I was cool with that, because I know most new bikers need to start riding on something cheap, and they're often willing to put in the effort to fix one up. But as our conversation went on, he excitedly told me his story. He had brought his sister with him earlier because his father, who was a motorcycle nut, had recently passed away, and he didn't have anyone else to help him shop for a bike. He had just graduated from high school, and his plan was to fix up this bike and then take it on the trip of his dreams. He wanted to do a solo ride from eastern Canada south to tour the United States over the summer. By then I had heard enough, and I'm sure most of you know how I reacted. I told him that I just couldn't sell him this bike. I wouldn't have trusted it to get me across the city, let alone across the continent. Add to that the fact that this kid had zero experience working on bikes, and we have the recipe to turn his dream trip into a nightmare. I explained all of this, but he didn't want to hear it. He was excited to finally find a bike he could afford, and I guess when looking at the situation through his inexperienced eyes, making a worn-out old bike into a reliable touring machine was a simple thing for him to do. He started to argue with me, saying that I was obligated to sell him the bike because I advertised it for sale and he was willing to pay the asking price. So I had to put my foot down and tell him in plain English, I am not going to sell you this bike. I doubt he'd have made it to the US without a breakdown, let alone a longer tour. And because of his inexperience, he'd have been held hostage by any local shop that he could find to get it fixed, which I'm sure would have used up his travel budget long before the summer ended. He got more angry with me over the course of the call, but I held my ground. I even offered to help him shop for a bike that would suit his needs, and I warned him that it wouldn't be any bike that he could buy for a few $100. He eventually calmed down and thanked me for the offer, but I never heard from him again. So that old Seca sat around our place for a while longer until a landscaping contractor who was doing some work in our yard noticed it. He asked about it, and I gave him all the dirty details. He was a 40-something guy who worked on old bikes and understood what it meant to buy one like this. In the end, he accepted the bike as payment for the work he did to our yard, which was a fair deal for both of us. I've often wondered how things turned out for that teenager who wanted this bike. I felt bad crushing his dreams, but that old bike would have crushed them anyway. I just hope the seller of the next unreliable bike he found had the conscience to do what I did. That kid would now be nearing the age of 50, so I'm sure he realizes that I did him a solid. And I sleep better knowing it. Thanks for watching.